Welcome to episode 2 of Davos Watch, where we keep an eye on the global elites from Davos to the UN and all the other advocates of global fascism and totalitarian technocracy. This week, our story comes from the World Economic Forum and their new report titled Green Returns Unleashing the Power of Finance for Sustainable Food Systems. But before we get into that specific report, I have to lay out a little bit of context here, some important context. So, agriculture is a topic that is often discussed by the Davos crowd. The World Economic Forum has an entire section on their website dedicated to agriculture. Back in 2022, Davos meeting during a panel titled Redefining Food Systems with Emerging Technologies, experts agonized over the reality that agriculture industry prioritized, get this, producing food. In that panel, Sven Tori Holstetter, president and CEO of Yara International, said, quote, "We have a food system that is only focused on kilos produced, not environmental impact, productivity, nutritional content, water consumption, carbon sequestration. That's all disregarded." These panels and numerous articles and reports on the World Economic Forum website and other like-minded organizations' websites promotes the idea of designing a more inclusive and sustainable global food system. See, the great minds over there at Davos believe that they can run the world better if they can just get their hands on the controls of society. And this is honestly a common link between this topic and pretty much any other specific topic that I'll ever discuss on Davos Watch, is that everything will run better if you just give them the controls. And the justification between these things is also often the same, and that is climate change. So, climate czar John Kerry laid it out pretty bluntly a few months ago in May, when at the Aim for Climate Summit hosted by the Department of Agriculture, he said that net zero energy goals were impossible to meet without addressing greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. He said the industry, which accounts for 1/3 of the world's carbon emissions, has to be put front and center in the fight against climate change. There isn't a Davos meeting that takes place that doesn't include John Kerry as the speaker lineup. He is the most direct link you could imagine between the Davos crowd and the Biden administration. And the problem with all of this rhetoric, like I've mentioned before in past episodes of Davos Watch, or the past episode, is that Davos, they're massively influential. All of this rhetoric, it seeps down into the public policy of countries around the world. So it's so influential that countries around the world are putting these policy practices into place, and it's to detrimental effects. So let's briefly talk about some of these examples. The Netherlands and the Dutch farmers' protest from last year resulted from draconian mandated reductions in the country's nitrogen emissions. The mandates resulted in massive unrest amongst the farmers who realized the new regulations would destroy their livelihoods, forcing many to shut down their farms or ranches completely. And let's remember that the Netherlands is the second largest exporter of agricultural goods, second only to the United States. And there's also a direct link from this scenario that played out and the World Economic Forum. One of the World Economic Forum's plans was called for what they called food innovation hubs. And if you go to their website and you look up food innovation hubs, you'll see a lot of boring language about determining best practices for farming and making sure that those practices are disseminated to farmers around the world and building partnerships and sustainable development, et cetera, et cetera. But in one section, towards the bottom of their page, talking about these food innovation hubs, they have a paragraph describing how these food innovation hubs are supported by a global coordinating secretariat hosted by the World Economic Forum. So, like a centralized coordinating hub, I guess you can call it. So while the World Economic Forum plans suggest it wants to support local farmers, those farmers are all networked together under this centralized hub. And guess where that center point of this global coordinating secretariat program was going to be headquartered? That's right there in the Netherlands. In January of 2021, 18 months before the draconian nitrogen restrictions were unleashed on the country, the government of the Netherlands and the World Economic Forum announced the formation of the Global Coordinating Secretariat in the Netherlands, and the rest is history. Sri Lanka is another example we've discussed a number of times in this podcast. Sri Lanka destroyed its economy by banning chemical fertilizers with little or no warning to the country's farmers. Crop yields collapsed, and the government was forced to import crops from neighboring countries, which wreaked havoc on its already struggling economy. And coincidentally, I guess you can call it a coincidence. Just a few years prior to this development, the World Economic Forum published an article written by the then president of Sri Lanka titled, quote, "This is how I will make my country rich by 2025." In the article, he wrote about a bunch of things, including combating climate change and financing large scale green energy systems. Obviously, it didn't go according to plan. This is also happening in the Western world. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada and a former World Economic Forum young global leader, has been proposing a climate policy that seeks to cut fertilizer emissions by 30% by 2030 and 100% by 2050, despite the fact that Canadian agriculture groups warn that such a plan would decimate the crop yields of that country. The United States and the UK have also rolled out plans in recent years to essentially pay farmers to produce less food. So, to circle back to this new report from the World Economic Forum titled Green Returns Unleashing the Power of Finance for Sustainable Food Systems, in this report, the authors explain how banks and other financial firms offer money and other financial services to help farmers, farming companies, and other firms in the agricultural space to transition to a more sustainable model. And they argue that that amount of money should be multiplied by 15 and obviously financed by governments around the world, or maybe even international organizations like the UN or some of its agencies that are kind of under that. So this is the model that's advocated by the World Economic Forum and the Davos types. It's essentially a carrot approach to incentivize the industry to go along with their green, sustainable, inclusive agricultural system. The report outlines 5 tools financial institutions could use to adopt their vision of the sustainable agricultural system across the world. This includes supply chain finance, equity finance, insurance, debt, and grant and blended finance. All of this boils down to the same basics that underlie the ESG scheme. If you want access to money and financial tools, you'll play ball. The paper also outlines various tracking technologies that could be used to ensure transparency in the industry and evaluate performance. One section even discusses a supplier scorecard so that financial institutions can determine eligibility for different benefits. Data is also key to much of the World Economic Forum and Davos types plans for control, but that's a topic for a future episode of Davos Watch. But all of these things have that those little strings attached to it, where if you want all of this, you basically have to allow us to spy on every element of your business and all of that. And I would be willing to believe that this plan is really about making better agricultural sector choices and more sustainable system, whatever. If it weren't for the horrific track record of these plans and the centralized mechanisms that are required to operate these plans, and that we just went over, and the centralized mechanisms that put Davos elites and their supporters squarely in front of the control panel. And like I said last time, and I'll say at the end of each one of these segments, these plans and organizations are incredibly influential and well connected. And oftentimes the things they say and do go largely ignored, and they go ignored to our own peril. That is why I'm doing Davos Watch, and every week I intend to shine a light on some element of the global elites, and I hope you stay tuned so that you can stay informed.